What is going on, everybody? And welcome back to another episode of Your Requests. And this is the segment on my channel where you request movies for me to check out. And I've really been enjoying this segment a lot. I've been able to cover a wide variety of movies, and I've appreciated each and every one of your recommendations. And I was really excited about this movie in particular today because it is directed by Lars von Trier. And despite Lars being an incredibly sort of controversial figure who has done some relatively idiotic things throughout his career, he's kind of an egomaniac. He's still an incredibly talented filmmaker who has made some of my favorite movies of all time. I think there's no denying that the man is incredibly talented at his craft, and I've seen a decent amount of his filmography thus far, but this is one of the movies that has always been on my radar that I just haven't sat down and checked out yet, and I'm really looking forward to discussing the film Dogville with you today. Dogville is directed by Lars von Trier. When a beautiful young Grace arrives in the isolated township of Dogville, the small community agrees to hide her from a gang of ruthless gangsters, and in return, Grace agrees to do odd jobs for the townspeople. So, I was really excited to watch this movie. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of Lars von Trier's work. I've really enjoyed pretty much everything I've watched in his filmography, and this movie is masterfully made. It is absolutely incredible, and I honestly think that the subject matter in this movie is as poignant as ever. And it was really interesting thinking about this movie being made not long after 9/11 and like the state of the United States at that point, and just the cultural commentary that exists throughout that still translates into our modern times so very well. And I'm looking forward to telling you about the film today. So at the beginning of the movie, we are introduced to Grace, played by Nicole Kidman, who at the beginning of the film is fleeing from this group of mobsters, and she flees to this very small town called Dogville that has a very tiny population. They're kind of shut off from the world. They don't have really access to media. They have like one radio and they don't really get the news. They just get music. And so they have this very tight-knit community. And there's this entire cast of characters that I'm not going to go through and list every single one, but the main character to focus on outside of Grace is Tom, played by Bettany, who is kind of the town's philosopher. He's always like having these lectures with the people in the community, and he is discussing the idea of empathy to his people and essentially showing compassion for others and caring for other human beings that are different than yourselves or that come from a different background. And so Grace stumbles into the town and they bring her into the fold, and obviously everyone in this community, because it is a very tight-knit and small community, is worried about the outside world coming in and sort of polluting their community. And so Tom recommends to the people to see if Grace can become part of their community, for her to have 2 weeks that she does odd jobs for the people around the town and get to know them to see if she can be acclimated into the community. And she does, and eventually the town accepts her. And the entirety of the film is after the town accepts her, people taking advantage of her work and taking advantage of her and sort of shifting this kind, cordial relationship into something much more sinister. So like I said, this movie is nothing short of masterful. It's one of the best things I've watched this year thus far, without a doubt, and there are a multitude of reasons. And the first thing I want to talk about, the production design in this movie is unbelievable. It's incredibly minimalist. It feels like a stage show. So it's literally all shot on this one stage, and each and every house and area of the community is literally just a structure, like chalk on the floor with just little things around it, with literal chalk writing that tells you the name of the building. And there's other little bits and pieces added, like there are cars there. The church, there's like the bell for the church, not the whole structure of the building. The woman who is in charge of keeping the church, there's a piano there. There's obviously little bits and pieces and sets and props, but it feels like going to see a Broadway stage play. And I loved that. I think when you decide to approach a film with a minimalistic intent, it's always interesting to see how it will carry over with like heavy themes or whatever the movie's trying to convey. And it was just fascinating to look at. There's so much attention to detail in lighting and camera placement. And Lars is someone who throughout his career has experimented with different ways to move the camera. And there's a lot of like handheld sort of shakier shots and then a lot more static shots that focus on character interactions. And I think the camera is utilized utilized brilliantly in order to really bring out these actors' performances because of how minimalistic the set is. And I also think keeping it so minimalist makes this area of Dogville so reflective of the larger population of the United States and so many communities that act the same way as this community does. And so there's a lot of thought put in to the production design and all of the elements of the filmmaking that I think make the movie such a successful viewing experience. Secondly, the performances here. I could go through each and every actor. This is a star-studded cast filled with amazing actors that all have a ton of longevity in the industry. But really the standout in this movie is Nicole Kidman. She is absolutely phenomenal. I've loved Nicole throughout pretty much her entire career. This might be one of my favorite performances I've ever seen her give. Like, truly, the vulnerability, the pain behind her eyes, the compassion that she shows to people early on, the shift in the emotions that she has to experience, and her character goes through some traumatically horrific things in this movie. And I just think for a performance from an actor to showcase that wide array of emotions, it takes someone really talented to make it feel realistic and not just like faked Hollywood emotionality. And she nails it completely and totally in this movie. I was just so incredibly blown away by her performance in this movie, and I can't commend her enough. And I think everyone else in the movie does a really phenomenal job. Paul Bettany does a really great job playing like her direct counterpart in this movie, the man who shows her romantic interest, who's kind of trying to turn the wheels of knowledge for the people in this community, but he's also kind of consumed by his own ego. And so he is an incredibly flawed individual. And what I really like about each and every one of these cast of characters is on the outside, it starts off as kind of like a sort of like a charming Andy Griffith kind of town where everyone has these quirky characteristics and everyone in the community like fits a specific role, but they're all fundamentally flawed. It almost kind of parallels to what I think about David Lynch's work when you think about something like Blue Velvet, where you're examining these very small towns that like have the picturesque, perfect white picket fences, and everyone assumes that everything in these communities is completely and totally normal. But when you start to pick at the underbelly, there's something much more sinister and disgusting and vile underneath the surface. And that's what this is, except it doesn't have all the frills of the visuals of a David Lynch film. It strips those away so you see these human beings for who they are. And I love the way that it gets exposed throughout this 3-hour runtime of a movie. I also love the musical choices in this. Feels very theatrical. Like I said, stage play. I just think that the cues of the music in particular scenes really make it an enthralling experience. And I know there's all this discussion as of late about movies being 3 hours long. And this is a movie that pushes 3 hours that feels like it earns every minute. I was never bored. I was constantly on the edge of my seat and wondering like what was going to happen next. And just at each and every turn of the film, I was completely and totally in awe of what Lars was able to accomplish. And this movie explores a ton of themes, and I'm not going to be able to cover every single thing that Lars is trying to discuss with this in this movie, but there were a few really remarkable takeaways that I have for this. And the first one is it is very difficult to teach empathy to people that don't already understand it. And what's interesting is we have Paul Bettany's character at the beginning of the movie is trying to teach these people who live in an isolated bubble what compassion for people who are different than you is like. And what's interesting is when you look at the cast of characters in this community, there's only 2 black people that live in their community, and their understanding of the lives of people outside of their very white neighborhood is really, really small. And even understanding people that come from a bigger city or that have had different life experiences than them. And it was interesting to watch this person try to educate them and how they just completely fell short time and time again of understanding it. And I think that's very true now. I mean, when we see the current political administration, there is no empathy from the people in charge right now. They do not care about human beings. It's about pushing an agenda of hatred towards groups of people to band together the people who also hate those groups of people. But what that group of people that is being manipulated doesn't realize is the people in charge don't care about their best interests either, and it will eventually bite them on the ass. And that people if they could strip away their prejudices and get rid of all the things that they understand that cause people to pit each other against each other, and realize that all of us as human beings are striving for the same thing, a life that we can enjoy and appreciate and look forward to the future, then we would understand that these people in charge, especially the billionaires that are trying to run our country, do not have our best interests at heart. And I think that that really hit home for me in this movie. And I think the other thing that I really appreciated about this is people that commit heinous acts against others repeatedly and don't learn from it don't deserve our apologies. And this movie showcases it in the most brutal, visceral way imaginable, that just because you ask for forgiveness doesn't mean you are earned it. And I think that's something that isn't taught enough. And I think that it's a very harsh truth. But the people in this movie do unforgivable things. They do things that showcase that they do not care about people. They do not care about people from the outside world. They only care about what exists to them in that very particular moment. And everything else outside of that doesn't matter. And I think that's so indicative of how our country operates, because I grew up in a lot of very small red towns, very conservative towns. I was raised by a minister. And what's really interesting is when you live in those communities, they are so incredibly unaware how the outside world operates. They aren't concerned with communities that are saturated with people of color and people from different countries and immigrants and all of those things. And they don't understand what it's like to wake up in a world and like fear for your life every day or fear for your safety. I talked about the film Nickel Boys a while back, and just like the poignancy of that movie and understanding the experiences of what African Americans dealt with in this country and what they still deal with in this country, and how so many white people are just completely and totally blinded to the experience of people of color. And what this movie shows is a group of people that are shut off from the entirety of the world, that they do not care about the experiences of other people, and that someone from the outside world who, as we learn throughout the film, comes from a very difficult background but is trying to strip that away and wants to be a good person and a compassionate person, and her compassion and her goodness is taken advantage of, and eventually she is treated horribly and just completely and totally disregarded because of the prejudices and the fears of this community. And I think that that's so directly indicative of what we see from so many red pockets of the country. And as I was watching this movie, it really just continued to sit with me in a way that affected me so viscerally, and it really moved me emotionally. And I think the third act of this movie, it's incredibly cathartic. You don't often see a movie where it's like the begging for forgiveness from the vile, evil human beings is not reciprocated. It's, you do not deserve the reprieve of the horrors of your actions. And there's so many people that don't understand that in this world. I mean, a convicted felon is running the country. Like, there are people in this world who do horrible things that never receive punishment for their actions. And so to watch a movie that goes that far, it really shook me to my core. And I thought that it was incredible. And I think this is one of those movies that needs to be added into your must watch list if you've never seen it. It is a pure and complete and total work of art. And it just goes to show that Lars von Trier, one of the best to ever do it. So have you seen Dogville? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought. I thought this movie was exceptional. I loved it, and I'm already looking forward to watching it again. As always, if you can like the video and subscribe to the channel, helps me out a lot and lets me know the type of content you're looking for. I'm always putting out new material and look forward to getting more out for you in the near future. And as always, everyone, thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your day.